Georgie hadn't set foot in his hometown for over 10 years. Life had pulled him away from the quiet, sleepy streets where he grew up, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names and kids played outside until the streetlights came on. It was a town full of memories, most of them tied to his father, a man who had been his hero, his guide, and his best friend, all rolled into one. But now, that same town felt distant, almost foreign to Georgie. The last time he'd been there, it was for his father's funeral, a day filled with tears, heavy hearts, and unanswered questions. The letter arrived unexpectedly on a Tuesday morning. Georgie was sitting at his cluttered desk in the small apartment he called home, sipping coffee while scrolling through emails. Amidst the usual spam and work notifications, an envelope slipped through the mail slot. He picked it up curiously. The handwriting was neat but unmistakably old-fashioned, written in blue ink on crisp white paper. Inside, the message was brief. Annual memorial service for John Miller, Saturday, 3 p.m. His father's name stared back at him, bold and unyielding. For a moment, Georgie just sat there staring at the words. He hadn't planned to go back, not yet anyway. Work kept him busy, life moved fast, and visiting the past seemed like opening a door he wasn't ready to walk through. But something about the letter tugged at him. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was simply the fact that he missed his dad more than he cared to admit. Whatever it was, by lunchtime, Georgie's had booked a flight. The journey back to his hometown felt surreal. As the plane soared above the clouds, Georgie couldn't help but think about how much had changed since he left. Back then, he was younger, unsure of himself, chasing dreams that felt bigger than the town could hold. Now he was older, wiser, but also weighed down by responsibilities and regrets. He wondered if the people he used to know would still recognize him. Would they see the boy who once ran around barefoot in summer, or the man who now wore suits and carried a leather briefcase? When the taxi dropped him off near the edge of town, Georgie decided to walk the rest of the way. The air smelled different here, cleaner, fresher, with hints of pine trees and freshly cut grass. The roads were lined with golden autumn leaves crunching softly under his shoes as he strolled. Every corner he turned brought back flashes of his childhood. The park where he learned to ride a bike, the ice cream shop where his dad always let him pick 2 scoops, the library where they spent rainy afternoons reading together. Each memory hit him like a wave, warm and bittersweet. By the time Georgie reached the cemetery, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The graveyard itself was peaceful, almost serene. Rows of headstones stood silently, surrounded by tall trees whose branches swayed gently in the breeze. Georgie walked slowly, scanning the names engraved in stone, until he found the one he was looking for. John Miller, beloved father and friend. His throat tightened as he knelt down beside the grave. He placed the bouquet of flowers he'd brought carefully on the ground. They were lilies, his father's favorite. As he straightened up, Georgie took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This wasn't easy. 10 years had passed since his father's death, but the pain still lingered, sharp and raw at times. He remembered the phone call vividly, the panicked voice on the other end telling him his dad had suffered a heart attack. By the time Georgie made it to the hospital, it was too late. That moment haunted him, replaying in his mind like a broken record. Why hadn't he visited more often? Why hadn't he said everything he wanted to say? Lost in thought, Georgie didn't notice the change in the atmosphere right away. At first it was subtle, a slight shift in the wind, a rustling of leaves that seemed louder than before. Then the temperature dropped ever so slightly, sending a shiver down his spine. He glanced around, half expecting to see someone else nearby, but the cemetery was empty, save for the rows of graves stretching out endlessly. Still, something felt off. As Georgie stood there, gazing at his father's headstone, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. It wasn't fear. Exactly. It was more like anticipation, as though something was about to happen. The silence around him grew heavier, pressing against his ears. And then, just as he was about to turn and leave, he heard it. A whisper, soft and faint, carried on the breeze. Georgie. His name. Someone, or something, had said his name. His heart skipped a beat and he spun around, searching for the source. But there was no one, just the graves, the trees, and the fading light of the setting sun. Georgie swallowed hard, telling himself it was nothing. Probably just the wind playing tricks on him. Yet deep down he couldn't ignore the chill that ran through him. Something about this place, this moment, felt different. Special even, like the universe was trying to tell him something. And so, despite the unease creeping into his chest, Georgie stayed. He stayed because he needed answers. Because he owed it to his father, and to himself, to figure out what this strange sensation meant. Little did he know the journey he was about to embark on would change him forever. The whisper lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. Georgie's name had been spoken so softly that for a moment he wondered if he'd imagined it. His heart pounded as he turned in circles, scanning the cemetery for any sign of another person. But there was no one, just rows of silent graves and the occasional flutter of leaves overhead. The sun had almost disappeared behind the horizon now, casting long shadows across the ground. The light was fading fast, and with it came an eerie stillness that made the hairs on Georgie's arms stand up. He tried to rationalize what he'd heard. Maybe it was the wind carrying sounds from somewhere else, a distant conversation or the rustle of branches mimicking speech. Or perhaps his mind was playing tricks on him, conjuring voices out of loneliness and grief. After all, he hadn't been back here in years. This place was soaked with memories, emotions he'd buried deep inside himself. Was it possible that his subconscious was manifesting them in strange ways? But no matter how hard he tried to convince himself otherwise, the feeling wouldn't go away. That whisper, it wasn't random noise, it was deliberate, personal. Whoever, or whatever, had said his name knew him. And that thought sent a fresh wave of chills down his spine. Georgie crouched beside his father's grave again, gripping the edge of the headstone tightly as though it could anchor him to reality. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside him. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. "You're just tired. You've had a long day." But even as he spoke the words, they sounded hollow. Deep down, he knew something unusual was happening, and ignoring it wasn't going to make it stop. The wind picked up again, swirling around him like a gentle embrace. It wasn't cold this time. Instead, it felt oddly warm, almost comforting. Georgie hesitated, unsure whether to move or stay put. Then, without warning, the whisper returned. This time it was clearer, more distinct. "Georgie." His name hung in the air, lingering for a few seconds before fading into silence. His pulse quickened. He stood up abruptly, backing away from the grave. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly. There was no response, only the sound of leaves rustling above him. Georgie clenched his fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "If someone's messing with me, it's not funny," he shouted, louder this time. Still, nothing. Just the empty expanse of the cemetery stretching out around him. For a brief moment, Georgie considered leaving. Whatever was happening here was too much for him to handle. He could walk away right now, get back in his car and drive straight home. Pretend none of this ever happened. But something stopped him. A small, stubborn part of him refused to give up. If there really was some kind of message meant for him, he owed it to himself and to his father to figure it out. With cautious steps, Georgie began exploring the cemetery, moving farther away from his father's grave. The farther he went, the darker it became. Shadows stretched across the ground, distorting the shapes of tombstones and trees. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of the world was pressing down on him. Yet, despite the growing unease, he pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. As he wandered deeper into the graveyard, Georgie noticed something peculiar. Certain areas seemed brighter than others, as if patches of moonlight were breaking through the clouds to illuminate specific spots. One such patch caught his eye. It bathed an old oak tree in silvery light, making it stand out against the dim surroundings. The tree was massive, its gnarled branches reaching skyward like skeletal fingers. Georgie remembered it vaguely from his childhood, It used to be a favorite spot for him and his father during their visits to the cemetery. They'd sit beneath its sprawling canopy, sharing stories or simply enjoying each other's company. Drawn by a mix of nostalgia and instinct, Georgie approached the tree. As he got closer, he noticed something etched into the bark near the base. At first glance, it looked like ordinary carvings, initials and dates left behind by visitors over the years. But as he knelt down to inspect them more closely, his breath caught in his throat. Among the faded marks were two sets of initials that made his chest tighten: GM and JM, his own and his father's. Memories flooded back in an instant. He and his dad had carved those initials into the tree decades ago, laughing as they worked together to make sure the letters were perfect. Back then, it had been a light-hearted gesture, a way to leave a piece of themselves behind. Now, seeing them again after all these years felt surreal, almost sacred. Georgie ran his fingers over the grooves, marveling at how time had weathered the wood but hadn't erased their bond. But then something else caught his attention. Beneath the old carvings, newer ones had been added. Letters and words that definitely hadn't been there when he was a kid. These markings were fresh, sharp, and unmistakably intentional. Squinting in the dim light, Georgie leaned closer to read them. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. "I'm proud of you." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Tears welled up in his eyes as he traced the letters with trembling fingers. Who could have done this? And why? The timing was too coincidental to dismiss as mere chance. Could someone have known he'd be visiting today? Had a friend or relative arranged this as a surprise? But deep down, Georgie knew better. No one else knew about the old carvings, not even his mother. This was something else entirely. 1,000 questions raced through his mind, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a random act. Whoever or whatever had written those words wanted him to see them. They were meant for him, and only him. The realization sent a shiver down his spine, but it also filled him with a strange sense of comfort. For the first time in years, Georgie felt like his father was close by, watching over him. Unable to tear himself away, Georgie sat down beneath the tree, leaning against its sturdy trunk. The wind continued to swirl around him, carrying with it that same warmth he'd felt earlier. He closed his eyes, letting the sensation wash over him. In that moment, he didn't care about explanations or logic. All that mattered was the overwhelming feeling of connection, the sense that somehow his father was reaching out to him from beyond. As the minutes passed, Georgie found himself talking aloud, voicing thoughts and feelings he'd kept bottled up for years. He talked about his guilt, his regrets, his fears. He shared memories of happier times and admitted how much he missed having his dad around. And as he spoke, the weight on his shoulders began to lift, replaced by a glimmer of hope. Maybe this strange encounter wasn't meant to scare him. Maybe it was meant to heal him. By the time Georgie finally stood up, the stars had begun to twinkle in the night sky. The cemetery was quieter now, the eerie tension replaced by a peaceful stillness. Though he couldn't explain what had happened, or why, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't ready to leave yet. Not until he understood the full meaning, behind the whispers, the carvings, and the undeniable presence he'd felt tonight. Whatever answers awaited him, he was determined to find them. Georgie woke up the next morning feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The events of the previous evening replayed in his mind like a surreal movie: his father's grave, the whispering wind, the mysterious message carved into the oak tree. He couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening, something beyond his understanding. As he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he realized he had two choices: dismiss it all as some bizarre coincidence or dive deeper to uncover the truth. Georgie wasn't ready to let go just yet. After grabbing a quick breakfast at a local diner, a place he vaguely remembered from his childhood, he decided to return to the cemetery. The sun was high in the sky this time, casting golden light over the landscape. The graveyard didn't feel as eerie in daylight. Instead, it seemed almost peaceful, bathed in warmth and surrounded by chirping birds. Still, Georgie's heart raced as he approached the familiar path leading to the old oak tree. He wasn't sure what he expected to find there, or if anything would even be different. But he felt compelled to go back. When he reached the tree, everything looked exactly the same as it had the night before. The initials were still etched into the bark, the words, "I'm proud of you," standing out sharply against the weathered wood. Georgie ran his fingers over them again, half expecting them to vanish under his touch. But they remained solid, real, undeniable. Sitting down beneath the tree, he leaned against its trunk and closed his eyes, trying to make sense of it all. Hours passed without him noticing. The quiet rhythm of the breeze and the distant hum of nature lulled him into a meditative state. For a while, he simply existed in the moment, letting his thoughts drift. Then, as the afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, he heard it again, the whisper. This time, it wasn't just his name. It was clearer, more deliberate, as though someone were speaking directly to him. "Georgie." The voice paused, then continued. "You've done well, son. Don't carry guilt anymore." His eyes snapped open, and he bolted upright, scanning the area frantically. The cemetery was empty, just as it had been the night before. Yet the voice was unmistakable, soft but firm, filled with love and reassurance. It sounded so much like his father that tears sprang to Georgie's eyes. He wanted to respond, to ask questions, to beg for more clarity, but the words caught in his throat. All he could manage was a choked whisper. "Is that really you, Dad?" There was no reply. The silence returned, heavy and unbroken. Georgie sat there for a long time, waiting, hoping for another sign. But nothing came. Slowly, reluctantly, he accepted that whatever connection he'd felt was gone, for now at least. Still, those few sentences lingered in his mind, echoing like a song he couldn't forget. "You've done well. Don't carry guilt anymore." The words struck a chord deep within him. Guilt. It was something Georgie had carried for years, though he rarely admitted it to himself. Ever since his father's death, he'd been haunted by thoughts of what he could have done differently. Should he have visited more often? Spent more time talking? Paid closer attention to his dad's health? These questions had gnawed at him silently, shaping his decisions and actions in ways he barely understood. And now hearing those words of forgiveness, words of pride, it felt like a weight lifting off his chest. But Georgie knew he wasn't finished. If this really was his father reaching out to him, there had to be more. More answers. More closure. More meaning. Determined not to let the opportunity slip away, he resolved to stay longer, to keep searching for signs. That evening, as twilight settled over the town, Georgie returned to the cemetery once more. Armed with a flashlight and a notebook, he prepared himself for whatever might come next. The air felt cooler this time, carrying the crisp scent of autumn leaves. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and the stars began to peek through the darkening sky. Georgie positioned himself near the oak tree, sitting cross-legged on the grass. He opened his notebook and jotted down everything he remembered. From the past 2 days, the whispers, the carvings, the emotions that had overwhelmed him. Writing it out helped him process, giving form to feelings that had otherwise felt chaotic and overwhelming. Time ticked by slowly. Minutes turned into hours, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Just when Georgie started to doubt whether anything else would happen, something caught his eye. High above him, the clouds parted, revealing a breathtaking display of stars. They twinkled brightly, scattered across the vast expanse of the night sky like diamonds on velvet. Georgie tilted his head back, taking in the beauty of it all. And then he saw it, a constellation unlike any he'd ever noticed before. At first glance, it seemed random, just a cluster of stars forming shapes he couldn't immediately identify. But as he studied it more closely, a memory surfaced. His father used to love football, and they'd spend countless Sundays cheering for their favorite team together. The insignia of that team, an eagle holding a shield, had been everywhere in their house, on jerseys, mugs, posters. And now, Looking up at the stars, Georgie realized the pattern resembled that very emblem. A lump formed in his throat as another memory bubbled to the surface. One summer night, when Georgie was about 10 years old, his father had taken him stargazing in the backyard. They'd lain side by side on a blanket, pointing out constellations and making up stories about them. At one point, his dad had said, "No matter where we are, we'll always find each other under the same sky." Back then, Georgie hadn't fully grasped the significance of those words. Now, staring at the starry pattern above him, he finally understood. It wasn't just about football or nostalgia. It was about connection. His father wasn't trying to haunt him or confuse him. He was reminding Georgie that their bond transcended life and death. Even though they were separated by worlds, they were still connected, in memories, in lessons learned, in moments shared. The stars weren't just beautiful decorations in the sky. They were symbols of eternity, of love that never fades. Tears streamed down Georgie's face as the realization washed over him. He clutched the notebook tightly in his hands, scribbling furiously to capture every thought racing through his mind. None of this made logical sense, not the whispers, not the carvings, not the constellation. But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the message behind it all. That his father was proud of him, that he didn't need to hold on to guilt, and that their connection was stronger than any physical barrier. By the time Georgie finally stood up, his legs stiff and his cheeks damp, the cemetery was cloaked in darkness. The stars shone brighter now, lighting up the night with their brilliance. He took one last look at the oak tree, committing every detail to memory before turning to leave. As he walked away, he whispered softly into the night, "Thank you, Dad, I won't forget." Though he didn't know it yet, this experience would change Georgie forever. It wouldn't erase his grief or bring his father back, but it would give him something equally precious. Peace. Peace in knowing that love endures, even when people don't. Peace in understanding that sometimes the most profound messages come not in loud declarations, but in quiet whispers carried by the wind. The next morning, Georgie woke up feeling different. It wasn't just the lack of sleep or the whirlwind of emotions from the past 2 days. It was something deeper. For the first time in years, he felt lighter, as though a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. The guilt that had clung to him like a shadow was still there, but it no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it felt manageable, almost like an old wound beginning to heal. He knew he couldn't explain what had happened, logically, and he didn't try to. What mattered was how it made him feel, connected, understood, and loved. After grabbing another quick breakfast at the diner, a place that now seemed oddly comforting, he decided to spend the day exploring his hometown. Walking through the Ichi, streets brought back waves of nostalgia. Everything looked smaller than he remembered, yet somehow more vivid. The bakery where his dad used to buy fresh bread on weekends was still there, its windows filled with golden loaves and sweet pastries. The park where they'd played catch was quieter now, its swings swaying gently in the breeze. Even the library, once their sanctuary during rainy afternoons, stood unchanged, its brick walls weathered but sturdy. As Georgie wandered, memories flooded his mind. Each corner of the town held a piece of his father, his laughter, his advice, his unwavering support. It was strange how much he'd forgotten over the years, how life's busyness had pushed those moments to the back of his mind. But now, they came rushing back, clearer and more vibrant than ever. He found himself smiling at random intervals, caught off guard by the warmth of recollection. By late afternoon, Georgie returned to the cemetery. This time, he didn't go straight to the oak tree. Instead, he took his time walking among the graves, reading the names etched into stone. Some were familiar, others weren't. Yet each one told a story, a life lived, a family left behind. As he moved slowly through the rows, he realized something profound. Death wasn't the end. People may leave this world physically, but their legacies live on, in memories, in lessons, in the impact they have on those who remain. When he finally reached the oak tree, the sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the ground. Georgie settled down beneath its branches, leaning against the trunk as he had before. He opened his notebook and began writing, not about the mysterious events of the past few days, but about his father. He wrote about the things he missed most. His dad's booming laugh, the way he always knew how to fix anything, the quiet wisdom in his words. He wrote about the lessons he'd learned growing up, the importance of kindness, patience, and resilience. And he wrote about the dreams he'd shared with his father, the ones he'd put aside when life got too busy. For hours, Georgie poured his heart onto the pages. Writing became cathartic, a way to honor his father while processing his own emotions. By the time he stopped, the notebook was nearly full. He closed it carefully, feeling a sense of accomplishment he hadn't expected. It was as though putting pen to paper had solidified the connection he'd felt under the stars the night before. As darkness fell, Georgie stayed rooted to the spot. He wasn't sure why, but he felt certain that tonight would bring another sign. Whether it was the whispers, the carvings, or something entirely new, he trusted that his father, or whatever force was guiding him, wasn't done speaking yet. So he waited, watching as the sky transformed from deep blue to black, sprinkled with countless stars. Around midnight, the air shifted again. A gentle breeze swept through the cemetery, carrying with it that same warmth Georgie had felt before. He sat up straighter, his pulse quickening. Then, without warning, the voice returned. This time it wasn't just a whisper. It was clear, steady, and unmistakable. "Georgie," it said, "you've carried enough." His breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You've spent so long blaming yourself," the voice continued, "but I'm here to tell you, you did everything right. You gave me love, respect, and joy. That's all any parent could ask for." Tears streamed down Georgie's face as he listened. He wanted to argue, to list all the ways he thought he'd fallen short. But something inside him stopped him. Maybe it was the sincerity in the voice, or maybe it was the weight of the truth sinking in. Whatever it was, he couldn't deny it anymore. His father was proud of him, not because of grand achievements or perfect behavior, but because of the simple, genuine bond they'd shared. "I miss you," Georgie whispered, his voice breaking. "And I miss you too, son," the voice replied. "But we're not truly apart. Every star above us is a reminder of that." Georgie tilted his head back, gazing at the glittering expanse above him. The constellation, shaped like the eagle insignia, was still there, shining brightly amidst the sea of stars. He traced its outline with his eyes, marveling at its beauty. For the first time, he understood what his father had meant all those years ago. No matter where they were, they'd always find each other under the same sky. The voice faded after that, leaving Georgie alone with his thoughts. He stayed beneath the oak tree for a while longer, letting the silence wrap around him like a blanket. Though part of him wished the conversation could continue forever, he knew it was enough. The message had been delivered loud and clear. Let go of the guilt, cherish the memories, and keep moving forward. Eventually, Georgie stood up, brushing dirt off his jeans. He glanced at the tree one last time, running his fingers over the carvings. One final time. "Thank you," he murmured, unsure if anyone or anything could hear him. Then, with a deep breath, he turned and walked away. Back in his rented room later that night, Georgie stared out the window at the starry sky. He replayed every moment of the past 3 days in his mind, savoring the clarity they'd brought him. He realized now that his father's presence hadn't been limited to the cemetery. It had been with him all along, in the laughter of strangers, in the kindness of friends, in the quiet moments when he allowed himself to remember. Sleep came easily that night, wrapping Georgie in a cocoon of peace. When he woke the next morning, he felt ready to face the world again, not as someone weighed down by regret, but as someone inspired by love. He packed his bags, thanked the townsfolk who recognized him, and prepared to return to his city life. But he knew he wouldn't be the same person who had arrived just days earlier. Before leaving, Georgie made one last stop at the cemetery. Standing beside his father's grave, he placed a single flower on the headstone. "I'll see you again," he said softly, his voice steady and strong. under the same sky. Georgie's journey back to the city was a blur of highways, gas stations, and fleeting glimpses of landscapes speeding past his car window. Yet, despite the miles rolling beneath him, his mind remained tethered to the cemetery, the oak tree, and the voice that had spoken to him under the stars. The words echoed in his thoughts like a gentle refrain. We're not truly apart. It wasn't just comfort he felt. It was purpose. For years, Georgie had carried the weight of loss without fully understanding how to move forward. Now, he realized, moving forward didn't mean leaving the past behind. It meant carrying it with you, letting it shape you into someone stronger, kinder, and more aware of life's fragility. When he arrived home late that evening, his apartment felt different, emptier somehow. He dropped his bags by the door and wandered through the rooms, noticing how cluttered and impersonal everything seemed. There were piles of paperwork on the dining table, clothes strewn across chairs, and dust gathering on shelves. None of this had bothered him before. Now it felt suffocating. Georgie stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the chaos around him, and made a decision. If he was going to honor his father's memory, he needed to start by taking better care of himself and his space. The next morning, he woke up early and began cleaning. At first, it was practical, sweeping floors, wiping down surfaces, organizing drawers. But as he worked, something shifted. Each item he picked up reminded him of a story, a moment, or a lesson. A coffee mug from his office desk brought back memories of lazy Sunday mornings when his dad would sip tea while reading the newspaper. An old baseball cap tucked away in a closet transported him back to afternoons spent playing catch in the backyard. Even mundane objects, a pen, a keychain, a photograph, became treasures imbued with meaning. By the time he finished tidying up, the apartment looked almost unrecognizable. Light streamed through freshly cleaned windows, illuminating corners that had long been ignored. The air smelled fresh, and for the first time in ages, Georgie felt proud of where he lived. More importantly, he felt connected, not just to his surroundings, but to himself. Cleaning wasn't just about making things look nice. It was about reclaiming control, creating a sanctuary where he could reflect and grow. That night, unable to sleep, Georgie pulled out the notebook he'd used during his visit to the cemetery. He flipped through the pages, rereading the entries he'd written beneath the oak tree. They weren't perfect. Some sentences trailed off mid-thought, others were smudged with tears, but they captured the raw honesty of his emotions. As he read, he realized something remarkable. His father's presence wasn't confined to the graveyard or the whispers in the wind. It lived in these words, in the stories he'd recorded, in the memories he'd chosen to preserve. Inspired, Georgie decided to take it a step further. Over the next few days, he began reaching out to people he hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends, distant relatives, even coworkers he'd lost touch with, all received messages from him. At first, some were surprised, even hesitant. "Georgie, is that really you?" one friend joked during a phone call. But as conversations unfolded, laughter replaced awkwardness and connections reignited. Georgie found himself sharing stories about his father, recounting funny anecdotes and heartfelt lessons. In doing so, he kept his dad's spirit alive, not just for himself but for others who had known and loved him too. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Georgie stumbled upon an old photo album someone had posted online. It was filled with pictures from his childhood, birthday parties, family vacations, school events. Seeing those images stirred something deep within him. He remembered how much his father had loved photography, always carrying a camera wherever they went. "Every moment is worth capturing," his dad used to say. "You never know which ones will matter most later." Moved by the memory, Georgie dug out a box of old photographs from his closet. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, he sifted through them carefully, reliving each snapshot in vivid detail. There was one of him and his dad fishing by the lake, both grinning ear to ear despite catching nothing but weeds. Another showed them standing outside their house on Christmas morning, bundled in coats and scarves, snowflakes clinging to their hair. And then there was his favorite, a candid shot of his dad mid-laugh, his face lit up with pure joy. Georgie stared at it for a long time, feeling both sadness and gratitude wash over him. He decided to create something meaningful with these photos. Using his laptop, he started designing a digital scrapbook. Page by page, he arranged images alongside captions, quotes, and personal reflections. It wasn't just a collection of pictures. It was a tribute, a way to celebrate his father's life and legacy. When he finally completed it, Georgie sent copies to family members and close friends. Their responses were overwhelming. "Thank you for reminding us of all the good times," one relative wrote. "Your dad would be so proud of this." As weeks turned into months, Georgie noticed subtle changes in himself. He laughed more often, smiled wider, and approached challenges with renewed determination. Work projects that once felt monotonous now sparked creativity. Conversations that might have ended in frustration became opportunities for understanding. Most importantly, he stopped running from his emotions. Instead of shying away from memories of his father, he embraced them, finding solace in the love they represented. One crisp autumn afternoon, Georgie returned to the park near his apartment. It wasn't the same park where he'd played catch with his dad, but it held its own charm. Tall trees shedding golden leaves, winding paths lined with benches, and a small pond reflecting the sky above. He sat on a bench overlooking the water, watching children chase each other and couples stroll hand in hand. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the sounds of laughter and rustling leaves fill the air. And then, just like that, he heard it again, the whisper. Soft, barely audible yet unmistakable. "I'm here, Georgie." His heart skipped a beat, but this time he didn't feel startled. Instead, he smiled softly, opening his eyes to gaze at the horizon. "I know," he whispered back, his voice steady and calm. "I can feel you everywhere." In that moment, Georgie understood what true connection meant. It wasn't about seeing or hearing someone. It was about feeling their presence in every corner of your life. Whether it was in the warmth of the sun, the brilliance of the stars, or the laughter of strangers, his father was still with him. Not as a ghost or a shadow, but as a guiding light, an invisible thread weaving through his days, reminding him to live fully, love deeply, and cherish every moment. When he stood up to leave, Georgie felt lighter than ever. He didn't need answers anymore because he'd found what truly mattered. Peace. Peace in knowing that love never dies, only transforms. Peace in understanding that the people we lose remain with us, in our hearts, our actions, our memories. And peace in trusting that no matter where life takes us, we'll always find each other under the same sky. Months had passed since Georgie's visit to the cemetery, but the impact of that journey stayed with him like a gentle breeze that never quite faded. Life in the city moved at its usual frantic pace. Meetings, deadlines, traffic jams, but Georgie navigated it all differently now. He no longer felt like he was merely surviving. Instead, he approached each day with intention and gratitude. The lessons he'd learned under the oak tree and beneath the starry sky had become part of who he was, guiding him in ways both big and small. One chilly December evening, as snowflakes began to drift lazily from the sky, Georgie found himself standing in front of his apartment building, staring up at the heavens. The stars weren't visible tonight, hidden behind thick clouds and the glow of city lights, but he didn't need to see them to feel their presence. Closing his eyes, he let the cool air brush against his face, carrying with it memories of his father's voice. "We're not truly apart." Those words echoed softly in his mind, a reminder that love transcends time and space. Inside, Georgie lit a fire in the fireplace, a luxury he rarely indulged in, and settled onto the couch with a mug of hot chocolate. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, and he picked it up to find a message from an old friend. "Thinking of you tonight. Hope you're doing well." It was simple, yet it warmed his heart. Over the past few months, Georgie had made it a point to stay connected with the people who mattered most. Whether through phone calls, texts, or even handwritten letters, he worked hard to nurture those relationships. And in return, they enriched his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. As he scrolled through photos on his phone, Georgie came across the digital scrapbook he'd created for his father. Flipping through the pages brought back waves of nostalgia. The laughter, the adventures, the quiet moments shared between just the two of them. But this time sadness wasn't the dominant emotion. Instead, he felt pride. Pride in the man his father had been, pride in the bond they'd shared, and pride in how he was choosing to honor that legacy every single day. The next morning, Georgie woke up early, eager to start the day. For weeks, he'd been planning a project inspired by his father's love for storytelling. Growing up, his dad had always encouraged him to write, not because he wanted Georgie to become a famous author, but because he believed stories had the power to connect people. Now, Georgie decided to take that idea and run with it. He began drafting a collection of essays based on his experiences over the past year. The guilt, the grief, the whispers, the stars, and ultimately, the peace he'd found. Each chapter was a reflection not only of his own journey, but also of universal themes like loss, forgiveness, and resilience. Writing wasn't easy. Some days the words flowed effortlessly. Other days they felt stuck, buried beneath layers of doubt and hesitation. But Georgie pushed through, reminding himself why he was doing this. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about sharing a piece of his soul with others who might be struggling too. By the time he finished the manuscript months later, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just a book. It was a tribute to his father, a way to keep his memory alive while helping others heal. When the book was finally published, Georgie held a small launch event at a local bookstore. Friends, family members, and even strangers gathered to celebrate the occasion. As he stood behind the podium, reading excerpts from the essays, he noticed tears glistening in the eyes of many attendees. Afterward, people lined up to thank him, sharing their own stories of loss and healing. One woman hugged him tightly, whispering, "Your words gave me hope. Thank you." That night, as Georgie walked home under a canopy of twinkling stars, he realized something incredible. His father's influence extended far beyond his immediate circle. Through his actions, his choices, and now his writing, Georgie was spreading the love and wisdom his dad had instilled in him. In a way, his father's legacy lived on, not just in memories, but in the lives he touched. Years went by, and Georgie continued to grow. He traveled more, explored new hobbies, and embraced opportunities he might have shied away from before. Yet, no matter where life took him, he always returned to the cemetery on special occasions. Standing beside his father's grave, he'd share updates about his life, recounting milestones and challenges alike. Sometimes he'd simply sit in silence, feeling the familiar warmth of connection envelop him like a hug. One summer evening, during one such visit, Georgie noticed a young boy sitting beneath the old oak tree. The child couldn't have been older than 8, clutching a notebook and scribbling furiously. Curious, Georgie approached him slowly, not wanting to startle him. "What are you working on?" he asked gently. The boy looked up, startled, then relaxed when he saw Georgie's friendly smile. "I'm writing a story," he replied shyly, "about my grandpa. He used to tell me amazing stories, but he's gone now." Georgie's heart swelled. Kneeling down beside the boy, he said, "That's wonderful. You know, my dad loved telling stories too. Do you think your grandpa would be proud of what you're doing?" The boy nodded vigorously. "Yeah. I want him to know. I remember everything he taught me." Georgie smiled, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "He does know. Trust me, he's watching over you right now, cheering you on." For a moment they sat together in companionable silence, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. Then, as if remembering something important, the boy turned to Georgie and asked, "Do you miss your dad?" Georgie hesitated, considering the question. Finally, he answered honestly, "Every day, but missing someone doesn't mean they're truly gone. They live on in our hearts, in our actions, and in the love we share with others. That's how we keep them close." The boy seemed to ponder this for a moment before nodding thoughtfully. "Thanks," he said quietly, returning to his notebook. As Georgie walked away, he glanced back at the oak tree one last time. Its branches stretched toward the sky, sturdy and timeless, just like the bond between parent and child. Underneath it, the initials he and his father had carved decades ago remained visible, weathered but enduring. Nearby, fresh carvings caught his eye, new names, new messages, new connections being forged. In that moment, Georgie understood the full circle of life. We lose people we love, yes, but their essence remains woven into the fabric of our existence. Through memories, through acts of kindness, through the stories we tell, we carry them forward. And sometimes, whether through whispers in the wind or constellations in the sky, they remind us that love is eternal, unbreakable, and infinite.